Thanks very much for joining us for today's edition of the Intermodal Logistics Podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter, joined by my co-host for this edition, InTech Logistics CEO Rick Lagore. Hey, Rick.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Speaking of having someone back, we have Ari Ashe joining us from the Journal of Commerce. Ari, we've had you on a couple times, but it's been a little bit. We took a little gap there in time because, I mean, everyone's busy, and I think this summer has been maybe a little busier news-wise than maybe some of them. I don't know. Would that be accurate?
I think I had a full head of hair a year ago. Full head of hair. I don't. Joke.
Oh, we appreciate having you back on, and we're going to sort of bounce around topics here, but let's start with the one that everyone's talking about, and it relates to a couple of things here. So the merger, where are we at with that in the industry in terms of reactions overall? I know you've been reporting a lot on different providers' reactions to it and just how it's going to play out. So start wherever you'd like on sort of what you're hearing as the bomb was dropped, I guess, about a month ago now.
I think it's going to be a 12-round fight. I think we're, to use a baseball analogy, I think we're in the top of the first inning of a very long game. None of the providers that have come out on the intermodal space supporting it, are necessarily all that surprising. Obviously, Hub Group's going to support it because they use Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern, and Mode's going to support, Mode Transportation is going to support it as one of the big UP partners and a big user of the EMP program. CR England, no doubt supporting it. 98% of CR England's reefer volume in the West is on Union Pacific, so no surprises there. I think it goes without saying that probably JB Hunt will not be a fan of this deal and probably fight it in a number of ways. We'll obviously see if the BN and the CSX either get together or try and fight this. There's going to be a lot of opposition. We take it outside of the intermodal space. Obviously, we're going to see a lot of the rail shipper groups. Some of them have already come out opposed to it. The unions, Smart TD, one of the two top unions for the railroads, opposing it as well. This is going to be a long, nasty fight. Really, the clock actually is ticking because, yes, it could. Hopefully, UP wants to get this done in 22 months. I'm not sure that's going to happen. It may take minimally 24 to 36 months, and they're obviously doing this because of the Trump administration and the fact that the board's going to be tilted towards approval of this type of transaction, as it wouldn't have been in previous administrations. But given the length that this takes to be approved, you've got a ticking clock and a deadline of the end of this administration. And, I would say it's 50-50 at this point that they could actually get it done by then.
Yeah, you think of 22 months as a long time, but it moves quickly.
And there are various things that can be done along the way to sort of delay is not the right word, but there are certain areas along the way where the STB can say we extend the comment period, or there's something insufficient with the application and we're going to give you 60 days to fix it. So, 22 months is sort of everything goes right. There really aren't complications. Everything goes swimmingly, but we all know that's really not how it works. And there's, I think, going to be points along the way where extensions will be granted and it will go beyond 22 months.
So do you think that in terms of just the government side of things, that it is sort of amenable to this transaction possibly happening, aside from whatever happens with all of the other input?
Yeah, I mean, from the sheer politics side of it, right now, I believe we're at 2-2 on the Surface Transportation Board, Democrats, Republicans. There's one open seat that the Trump administration would obviously fill with a Republican, and therefore, just from a sheer voting perspective, you have the 3-2 advantage on your side. I would not imagine that either of the Democratic members of the Surface Transportation Board, certainly, not either one of them probably would support this. We've seen the Senator Chuck Schumer of New York coming out very much against this transaction. So my guess is the Democrats on the board will kind of go right along that line. So if you get the three Republicans that are aligned to the interest of Donald Trump, and UP and NS correctly sort of frame it in their world as the great American railroad, or whatever the MAGA equivalent or the MAHA equivalent of this would be, Make America Railroading Great Again, or whatever the 4-letter word would be for it, and get the Trump contingent on board, then they get a 3-2 victory. But it's going to be, again, a long, nasty fight, and it's just not going to be smooth. It's going to be nasty.
Yeah, and you had mentioned BNSF and CSX maybe getting in there, throwing their weight around. I didn't really get into the articles too much yesterday, but I saw some stuff in terms of KCS and CP possibly throwing some comments out there. They were thinking they were the last of the mergers, and so. There's yes, long fight, lots of things going on.
I'm not even sure, Rick, that it's necessary. I mean, Ancora, as people who watch it closely have now gotten into the fray, and people who watch this closely enough know how nasty it got with Norfolk Southern and Ancora a couple of years ago, and based on the initial letter that has been released to the press, it will get nasty again. But setting that aside, and they were pushed to try and get BN and CSX together as a second merged railroad, I'm not sure it's really, from an intermodal perspective, all that necessary. We know for a fact that that BN and CSX run that joint service to Fairburn, which is essentially at this point a single line train. We know that the BNSF and CSX run that joint train to Northwest Ohio, which is essentially, again, a single line train. If they could really figure out a way to solve that Southern California to CSX Kearney terminal in a more single line lane, rather than kind of taking it to Chicago and chopping and blocking it and steel wheeling it and sending it over, if they could figure it out and make it kind of like a Fairburn-like lane, I mean, at that point, I'd sort of question, from an intermodal perspective, what's left that is really not being handled in a single like service between BNSF and CSX that is necessary. I mean, you know this, Rick. We look at the volume here on that Transcon stuff. LA to Atlanta and LA to New Jersey is probably a vast majority of that sort of 53-foot true Transcon coast-to-coast volume. Maybe you throw in Harrisburg or Chambersburg in there, which you can make a stop along that train. And then at that point, you've pretty much covered the high-volume lanes that go coast-to-coast. Maybe you can accomplish that. I mean, I think it's fair to say you could accomplish that without actually formally merging BNSF and CSX.
I'd agree. I mean, the stuff that I've been thinking about in terms of intermodal on this merger talk is really, I think that the railcar business is probably something that would be a little bit more impacted, particularly on an immediate basis, than what we would see on the intermodal side. So, yeah, that's the direction I see. I mean, the other part that I see, you've got the Transcon for intermodal that is play, and you said that possibly you wouldn't even need to have a combination of railroads for that to happen. But the other part is on the, as you're running east and west, and essentially west of the Mississippi, you've got two railroads, the two mega railroads. Then east of the Mississippi, you've got the other. That where it crosses the freight, where it crosses going north and south, that's always been a problem. That's a donut hole, essentially, in the it's what I call a donut hole, essentially in the intermodal play, where you've got fairly short miles in comparison to Transcon. But in terms of transit, you lose between your north-south going where you have to make the interline movements. You definitely become uncompetitive when you're trying to work on pricing, and as also on transit when you're trying to compete against truck. But overall, I still think it's more of a play on rail cars immediately than it is.
No, I think you nail it, Rick. And internally, we've talked about this within the Journal of Commerce. Because from a journalism perspective, my bosses are like, you got to be all over it. You got to write about it. You got to write about it every day. You got to do, you got to be, this is everything. And my messaging is similar to what you have said, Rick, which is, to me, while there may be some benefits related to intermodal, especially if Jim Vena is able to rethink Chicago and Memphis, more Chicago than Memphis, and sort of it's no longer the junction point of everything. Right. Setting that aside, this is really a transaction that's primarily, yes, as you said about the carload customers. It's really about those carload customers that are, as you said, along the Mississippi River. They're a couple hundred miles on one side of the interchange between the UP and the NS, and it's a messy interchange because it's a lot harder in carload than it is in intermodal, and so they use the trucking industry. So when I think of trucks taken off the highway, the phrase that's commonly used, I would argue that a majority of the trucks taken off the highway are being taken off the highway for carload business and not intermodal business. But with that said, since you brought up inland earlier, we will have UP CEO Jim Vena on stage with us on the final day of the event, October 1st. So we'll certainly give him an opportunity to sell why this transaction is helpful to customers of Hub Group and Schneider and STG and Swift and the non-asset IMCs that use the UMAX and EMP program. Maybe he can convince me. Obviously, we'll talk to him a little bit about Chicago and figuring out if he can redraw the map, so to speak.
Right.
So what is the argument that you've heard so far on the intermodal side that they're pushing to as sort of the improvement factor there?
So I think the Chicago thing really is the point of the question. So I asked Jim Vena this on the press call the day they announced this, and his big thing was, now we no longer need to run transcon trains and have to do something because we have to do something in Chicago or Memphis or New Orleans. And so he at least says he's got this vision where he can run trains and and Chicago no longer has to be a stop where anything's done, more so that Chicago returns to a place, and Memphis, I guess, and New Orleans to an effect, be just a local stop, not a place where things are radically done to the trains anymore. To the extent that he is successful in that, maybe even finding ways to avoid Chicago on stuff that truly doesn't even need to go through Chicago anymore, then there could be a transformative effect. I'll believe it when I see it, but I think that's probably where he has to go with intermodal for it to make any sort of substantial difference.
And I mean, we're already talking about timeline of the potential deal whenever it happens. Have you gotten a feel, is there anything that would be done while it's sort of in process to start the engines on any kinds of changes like that, or is that all going to happen? And does that all have to wait till after? And then, so how many years down the road would that be if that was the case?
You have to walk the line on that, because there are, if you put it into a trust, that's going to be one of the issues. Is it, you'd want to ideally put it into a blind trust, because Norfolk Southern shareholders are not going to want to sit for 3 years to wait if the deal is approved or not. They want to be paid now. So you would want to place it into a blind trust and have a third-party administrator overseeing it and delist it from the stock exchange. And when you're at that point, there are very, very strict rules on sort of being able to do anything that smells of control or more than normal collaboration. So I don't think the answer is no, Kevin. I think it's more that you have to stay within the confines of what you would normally collaborate on to begin with, and not sort of seep into the area of acting as if it's an approved combined company. Otherwise, you're going to draw the ire of the STB.
Yeah.
So you've covered the industry for a while. How much did you see this coming to actually get to this point? Because I know we've talked to other folks, even just a couple months ago, who, there were certainly whispers of this for a while, and there's always been sort of a desire on some end to see something like this happen. But were you surprised when it actually got to the point of happening?
I was very surprised. Again, like you said, I heard the whispers. I didn't really think it was going to happen. And then the second part I tell you that sort of surprised me was that it was NS as opposed to CSX, because I kind of look at the networks and what Jim Vena is about, and not that I've struggled to find the word and what Jim Vena feels about intermodal. He doesn't hate it. I don't think he entirely loves it. I think he begrudgingly accepts the fact that intermodal is really the business line that will be growing in the future, as opposed to some of the other carload business. And he doesn't love it because, of course, the margins are not what you get in the carload business. So I don't know what the right adjective is there. I don't want to use the wrong one. It's somewhere in sort of that ambivalence is probably not even the right word, but somewhere in there. But point being, the reason I thought, when I hear about a merger, I would think CSX is that matches a lot better to the UP network and what Jim Vena is about than Norfolk Southern, to the extent that CSX is tipped a little bit more towards carload business than it is intermodal. I don't remember the numbers exactly off my head, but I think it's roughly 56-44 for CSX, which is a lot closer aligned to the UP network, whereas it's flipped for Norfolk Southern being, closer to 56% intermodal. So I kind of, not that I scratched my head, but I kind of said, I thought CSX probably would have been a better fit just from his vision of sort of what he thinks railroading is about.
So you talked about the pressure, the investor pressure a little bit on BN and CSX. I mean, do you see anything happening there? You already mentioned that it's not necessary in terms of service, but will it be necessary enough symbolically that there will be a push there?
Well, I'll tell you, one, my personal opinion, and then two, sort of a professional opinion. The personal opinion is that prior to booking Jim Vena on stage, we booked CSX CEO on stage for the final date, and still booked for October 1st. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he's going to have a job on October 1st. I mean, he's a good guy, so I certainly hope he does have a job, but I don't know if he does have a job on October 1st. Fortunately, with Vena, we'll be able to redo the agenda fairly easily and make up for it. Now, from a professional perspective, Ancora's just really, man, I hope Jim Chadwick's not going to listen to this podcast, but I think they're really nasty at Ancora. I don't know if it's Jim Chadwick writing these letters, whether Jamie Boychuk is involved. I mean, I've had good interactions with Jamie, so I can't say I have any evidence that it's Jamie Boychuk. But I don't know if he's involved, but it got really nasty when Norfolk Southern is, people listening to this might recall, they really called out John Orr in ways that I think really went beyond professionalism and decorum and just decency, saying, that he was sexist, that he was, harassing employees and a horrible boss and things that, things that you had heard rumblings of, and a paper trail that they did cite that did exist in his past, but things that kind of were just in the area of character assassination more so than really the issues that were at play between Ancora and Norfolk Southern and the vision of where to go with the railroad. And for those who might have read the letter to CSX, same exact thing that is going on here. Called the CEO's team a bunch of junior varsity executives and C players, referring to like the grade, C-level players, not C-suite, but sort of C-graded players, and calling out Mike Corey as essentially someone who was shoved out at Canadian National Railway and some person who's a horrible railroad operator and was, rebuffed by the industry as someone who doesn't understand what he's doing, and that Jamie was this railroad superstar that and others of Hunter Harrison that should never have been pushed out. I mean, again, just like character assassination that has nothing to do with really what it should be about, which is, is OR really the way we consider the success of the railroad? Does it go back to precision scheduled railroading? How much of the future of CSX is about service versus what the people on Wall Street want? Like real issues. So I don't know how it shakes out. But what I would also say is Ancora has been 0 for 2 because they tried it before Norfolk Southern with C.H. Robinson and were not able to get Jim Barber as the CEO there. Then they tried Jim Barber and Jamie Boychuk in Norfolk Southern. They weren't successful there. I mean, 0 for 3, I would not be surprised if they're 0 for 3.
Well, let's just jump to another topic then. Let's go to a topic that you've recently published out there, and it's very positive on the intermodal marketplace, and that is the service scorecard. So Why don't you jump into a little bit of that? And we're going to jump a few more times because there's so much to cover here.
Sure. So what we do is we begin with essentially what you did historically on people would do historically in Angie's List or Google reviews or Yelp or, pick the four. Amazon, I go, buy a product in Amazon. I can see, how many stars it gets out of 20,000 reviews and, want to pick the product that's got as close to 5 stars as possible and not the product that obviously has 2 stars. So we take that same concept. And so we do 2 surveys that built into the scorecard. And so we reach out to companies such as yours in regards to the railroads. Hopefully I didn't do anything by outing you there, but we reach out to a lot of the asset-based and non-asset providers and say, how are your railroad partners doing? And we go through all of the KPIs that are relevant for the service on the rail side, and then separate KPIs for companies such as Intech. And I think we do a really good job of asking things that are within the control of the various stakeholders. And then we tabulate the numbers. And so from the shipper side, we ask them various questions on how are companies like Intech and JB Hunt and Schneider and STG and Hub Group, how are they doing on all these KPIs? And we put together the numbers, and then we built out a scorecard that's based in one part on a 5-star scale on these KPIs. And then we do the natural net promoter score questions and how satisfied are you? Are they doing better than 6 months ago? Various common questions you'd see in surveys. Now, the good news is a lot of good results this past time around. 3 years ago,
results you've been able to report, yes.
Yeah, 3 years ago, it was, railroads were, weren't horrible, but they weren't necessarily great. And the survey of the asset and non-asset IMCs, I think, has always been strong. But at least on the rail side, a lot of improvement. And then from the asset, non-asset IMC side, continued strength. So to me, the 2 narratives coming out of this latest scorecard is one is Union Pacific. And I've said this to them specifically, these people who vote on you, one, vote on the other railroads. So to the extent that in the past they got poor scores, it wasn't like these companies were just trying to trash everyone. They were giving other railroads good scores. And secondly, there's very little turnover in terms of sort of who fills out these surveys. We have the known players in the intermodal world that don't move all of that much. So to the extent that, 3 years ago, 51% of the channel partners were rating Union Pacific as the worst railroad, and now today, a majority of them voted UP as the best railroad, is a testament to me, one of the themes that's out there that during the Vena era, he has changed the culture of the intermodal business there in a way that is much better than it was under Lance Fritz, which I think is a positive in the column of Jim Vena. And then when I would say I look at the other railroads, other than CPKC, and we all know the issues that they had, they've all gotten fairly good scores. I would say just because that UP got good scores doesn't mean necessarily BNSF is in trouble in any way. BNSF has gotten good scores since the very beginning. And so, someone asked me about BNSF, I'd say at a certain point you do hit a ceiling on how much better you can get. So it's not necessarily that UP's better than BN as much as BN is kind of does what it does and is about as consistent as it's been for the last 3 years. But even if I look at the East Coast railroads, CSX is a classic example of, I think, a positive from the railroad side of what's happening, because they've had a lot of disruption in their network with that Blue Ridge subdivision work. They're building an entire subdivision, and then they've essentially sliced their network in Baltimore in half. When you're running stuff from the southeast to the northeast, you've got to take it off at one point in Baltimore, dray it to the other side of Baltimore, and stick it on a second train. Their scorecard results were on par with all of our previous results, which tells me another positive thing, that communication is a big portion of this. It's not just what happens on the track, it's communicating to Rick and his team and other partners, hey, this is what's going on, or this is the new normal on CSX. And, correct me, Rick, jump in if you're wrong, but if I'm wrong here, but most of the companies I speak to say it's not even so much about transit time. It's about the quickness of the transit time. It's about the consistency of the transit time. It's about the standard deviation. So to the extent that CSX may take 12 or 18 or 24 hours longer on a transit because it has to be rerouted, so long as they constantly hit that time after time after time, You can plan your drayage, you can plan the delivery appointment, you can set expectations, and the shipper is totally okay with it. So other than CPKC from the railroad side, I'd say it was pretty much all very positive in this report. And then, with you guys, continued good scores. The one highlight I always like to point out with you guys on the asset and non-asset IMC side is you've always been really good at doing your best job insulating the shippers from whatever has happened on the rail side. Last peak season, some of the scores went down for the railroads for natural reasons, more volume, slower transits, longer transits, more left behind, left behinds, whatever term you want to use there. But last survey we did last fall clearly showed you guys were able to insulate the shippers from feeling that. And so, yeah, very good news all the way around. I think railroads headed in the right direction and certainly a much better place than it was 3 years ago at this time.
Yeah, it was great to see all levels on all sides go up this time around. And that just speaks volumes to what's going on in the industry and the focus on service. Absolutely.
By the way, Rick, I would also say, just because a lot of people ask me, non-asset IMC, what sort of, why should I be using the non-asset IMC? I think the theme we've seen throughout these surveys is, all right, we acknowledge the non-asset IMC is probably not going to be able to compete on price when one of the big three really want that lane. And the non-asset IMC doesn't have the tech portals of some of the big three. You set those two things aside, the non-asset IMC services the living heck out of the account. And so, if you really want an exceptional customer service experience, you're getting that from the non-asset IMC. Every shipper gets to choose what value they place on that versus dollars and cents, but you're going to get the service from the non-asset IMC.
So there's the service side.
Well, and before we move on from that, so I don't know if we've talked about it with you in the past, but we've talked about it with others in the past, that one of the areas that, intermodal needs to sort of have in order to realize some of the growth potential is the service. So is that story getting told enough? This is one way, obviously, of telling the story, but that's certainly a piece that the story needs to get out there to the folks who might be willing to consider it again.
So what I would say is I put a line at the end of my, at least as of us recording this, a recent story on JB Hunt pulling back on their peak season surcharges, a line at the end that said, despite what we're seeing growth-wise in terms of the ports in June and July, and some of the growth in the, particularly on the international side, but certainly to a degree on the UP and the domestic side, service is pretty well held up out of Southern California. And even last year, I got the complaints, but they were the normal peak season complaints. Nothing that a shipper should expect ever to be different. Shippers will say to me, service has to be exceptional 52 weeks out of the year. And I'll always go back to them and say, well, wait a second. You do have a peak season where there's a lot more freight moving through at, in July or August and September, October versus January, February. Just look at the highways that you drive on in the United States. You don't get the same experience at 3:00 in the morning as you do at 5:00 in the afternoon. So if you have this expectation that your service in September and October's look exactly the same way as January, then you fundamentally just don't understand how transportation works at all in the United States and probably the world. So there's really not much I can do from you. But the story is, last peak season, I think they handled it as well as possible for peak season. And so far this peak season, I really haven't heard anything. I think the thing we have to get over, Kevin, is this idea that, what is a normal peak season? So if I think over the last 10 years, we had a couple of hiccups in service prior to the pandemic that gave them a negative reputation. Then they had a really big one during the pandemic, and we really haven't had one since. We're never going to see, hopefully, the pandemic thing happen ever again in our lifetimes.
That's a really big block of wood.
Yeah, exactly. So do we avoid sort of what happened, the stumbles that we had pre-2020 from happening again? And so far we have. Hopefully that stays going forward. I can't tell the future. I don't have a crystal ball. And if I did, I'd want to know what the lottery numbers are for next week. Powerball in particular.
Yeah. All right.
Would we all? So
now your segue.
Okay, so now we always talk about service, which we just covered, but you also have your intermodal index in terms of savings index too. So that you've published some numbers here recently, and so let's talk about the cost side. So what came out of that study?
So it's interesting as we do it both on a percentage basis and a raw dollars basis, and maybe take a step back for people who are not familiar with the product. It's essentially saying if you're going to use 53-foot intermodal in the United States on a national and then a regional and lane basis, what should you expect to save per container, per trailing unit by picking Intech and other domestic intermodal providers versus using long haul trucking? And so the percentages, they move a little bit. And so for the prior quarter that ended, I believe it was about 18% savings on the spot intermodal side and about 25 on the contract side. I would say over like a good 3-year horizon, you could probably expect about 15 to 18% on spot and about 25 to 28% on the contract side. Nationally, obviously, every lane's different. You've got lanes that don't save anything and then lanes that save quite a lot. But then I would also say from a similar analysis from a raw dollar perspective, it actually doesn't move all that much over the long term. So like if you break it down into segments of less than 800 miles, 800 to 1200, 1200 to 2000, 2000 plus, okay, it moves $100 here or there over the year or two, but you don't see these wild swings. So you could actually get a pretty good sense from, again, lumping a bunch of lanes together, sort of, hey, this is where the line is where you're probably going to be getting a good amount of savings versus maybe not. We'll bring up what you said before, Rick, about the Mississippi, and the chart I like to always draw is just a big line down the Mississippi from Canada all the way down to the Gulf of whatever we call it now. And I say, well, if you start on, other than maybe north-south, if you start on one side of this line and end on the other side of the line, our survey has always shown you're going to save a lot of money. You're going to save 4 figures on your shipment. So, you run California over to really anything east of the Mississippi, you're going to save money. Go to intermodal. You're not going to be, unless you've got this super long dray of like 5 hours on either end, you should be saving money on intermodal. Where you get into the area in our index and just generally in pricing, having worked with many pricing directors and folks such as yourself, Rick, is when you get into the stuff that doesn't cross that line, that local west, that local east, that now we go north-south here, sort of that Texas to Midwest thing that kind of never really crosses the Mississippi, but kind of just stays in the Great Plains here. That's where we start to get trucking gets really, really competitive. And, maybe from a pricing perspective, you start to ask questions. But, if someone comes to me and says, I'm moving something from LA to Memphis or LA to New Jersey or LA to Chicago, should I be using intermodal or trucking based on price? I'd say, unless you're draining it from Chicago to next door to Schneider in Green Bay, you're always going to be saving money on it. Even if JB Hunt had kept that $1,500 surcharge, the delta is still more than $1,500. LA to Chicago certainly narrowed it, but these types of lanes, you still save money.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So how about the volume picture? Because that's something that sort of talks to the entire freight market when we're looking. You talked about the pandemic. Since then, things have quieted down considerably and have not really gotten to that point of full-on recovery yet. And then throw in the tariff policy roulette wheel that's been happening over the last several months. So where does it stand? Where did it stand in that quarter, the past quarter that you just released, and what are the thoughts of where it's going?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact percentage off the top of my head, but domestic was up a couple percentage points year over year. And as I look forward, I don't see that continuing. Again, we talked earlier about last peak season actually being fairly good in non-pandemic standards, throwing out sort of what we experienced in that period. It actually was a fairly decent peak season. And the July number was up, if I recall correctly, like it was less than 1%. It was like 0.5% or something like that across North America. And that encompasses what was actually a fairly good July for Union Pacific out of Southern California. Again, not so much for BNSF, thus the JB Hunt news that I've been reporting. But I just have a hard time believing that Q3 will be a positive number when we get in August and we get in September. And I ran some data, and if you look historically at the IANA data, and you throw second quarter to third quarter, and you throw it, I'll try not to get too geeky into statistical terms here, but if you throw it onto a scatter plot chart, there is a very neat line, a regression line that really connects Q2 to Q3, where you could really develop a formula that gets you very close to what you should expect in a Q3 based off of a Q2. Again, throwing out 2020 and 21 and taking basically, 2010 to 19, and then sort of 22 onward and throwing out the 2 years in the middle there. And so when you run that analysis and you run sort of the error rate on where it could go sort of up or down off of your estimate, my numbers had it at about only a 27% chance that volume would grow year over year in the third quarter across North America. And I still, despite what happened in July, still hold firm to that my guess is that volume in the third quarter will probably in North America, domestic containers be down 1 to 3% is my guess, and probably the same in the fourth quarter, which fortunately or unfortunately, depending on whether you're a shipper or a carrier listening to us, again, might not be so great for the contract negotiations that we'll start to see picking up in the fourth quarter.
I geek out on the numbers, not quite as much as Ari does. I will admit.
I don't know. I've seen a lot of spreadsheets when I walk by the office.
But I agree with you, Ari. I really think the volumes are going to continue to go down. I'm even looking at year over year, whether or not we're going to be even, if we're going to be even, because we have continued to see start off the year pretty strong. I think we're close to like 4.6% growth year over year, and it's slowly been whittling back to what we're about 3.5% at this point year over year. So are we going to be broke even by the end? I don't know. I hope we're somewhere there and above, but you could paint a picture that could be there and a little bit below.
Even if I look at August. Okay, so Union Pacific out of Southern California through the first couple weeks in August is up year over year. BNSF is down year over year and has pretty much been flat since January. BNSF does, as you know, BNSF does more domestic intermodal than UP does. So when you have to figure out sort of what does the data that I track out of Southern California mean from a larger perspective, yes, it's nice that UP's volume is growing and maybe whatever BNSF is flat, but you also have to take it in raw numbers. And we know that in a given week, BNSF does more volume out of Southern California than UP does. So you have to throw all those numbers together. And again, despite UP doing fairly well from a volume perspective, North America, I just don't see August being positive year over year. Maybe they eke out even at best, and certainly I don't see it in September based on the fact that all the numbers that we see in terms of what's on the water coming to the Port of LA and Long Beach pretty much going to dry up if it hasn't already in the next couple of weeks, which is, then we're going to start to see it. And I actually already did see it a little bit in the data from last week. We're going to start to see it in the IPI numbers, and we're going to start to see it in the domestic intermodal numbers.
Right. Agreed.
All right. So before we let you go, you've talked about inland a little bit, but and obviously the star guest, I think you just got announced a couple days before we recorded this. So yeah.
You want to pull behind the scenes a little bit behind that?
Yeah,
I'll pull the curtain a little bit, and then talk about the event. So I reached out to them after it happened, and naturally, people who follow the Journal of Commerce, we have the two big events: Inland, September 29th to October 1st in Chicago, and then TPM being our other big one, which will be at the very beginning of March of 26. And so I reached out to them, actually said, would love to have Jim Venn on stage at TPM. We're in a port environment. We can talk about the transaction. What does it mean for the domestic and intermodal shippers who are here in Southern California that ship either ocean or domestic containers out out of this area, and the offer's still open to them, but they came back and just said, can we do inland? Well, why not? I mean, yeah, sure. It's the big news. You led with it in this podcast. I mean, it's the big news. If you're going to offer me Jim Vetta, sure, I will say yes to that.
Yeah, twisted my arm, right?
Yeah, sure, for sure. Anyway, so to answer your question, you want to know a little bit more about inland. So inland is really our counterpart to TPM. So for TPM, people have been there. It's everything ocean. It's everything ports. Ocean carriers come from overseas. It's a big area where the shippers come not only for the content, but to negotiate ocean rates with their ocean carriers, get a lot of business done, get 3,000 people, 4,000 people at this event. Now, inland's not that big. We get maybe 700, somewhere in that ballpark. But we really make it the domestic counterpart where we replicate that same idea, knowing that, okay, well, our event runs from September 29th to October 1st. And we know there are a number of shippers out there who run their truckload and intermodal RFPs in October, November, December, make the awards, start the business in Q1. And they have an interest for an event similar to TPM, where they can prepare themselves for this pricing cycle that's about to begin. And so you build around that an event where we bring in shippers. And as of the time recording this, we've got 75 different shipper companies, and I believe roughly 125 individuals. And my hope is by the end of September, we'll probably get to 100 different companies, different shipper companies. You bring them in, you bring in companies such as Intech, you bring in the railroads, you bring them all into one place. Now we start a scenario where, hey, we can have some productive meetings where, a company that uses Intech and the UP and then uses maybe another provider and CSX or another provider and BNSF can come to the same place and just conduct tri-party meetings with their asset or non-asset IMCs and the railroad at the same table. Hey, we can prepare ourselves both in these meetings and during the sessions that we hold for what's going on in the market and what we should expect once we put that bid out to the street. What should we get in response? Now you build out an event that brings value to the shipper, brings value to the railroads, brings value to the truckload carriers, brings value to the asset and non-asset IMCs.
And so where can people go to find out more about that? And we talked about the Intermodal Savings Index and the Intermodal Service Scorecard, and of course, all of the great reporting.
All of that will be there. Yes.
Yeah.
All of that will be there. So you can go to events.joc.com, events.joc.com, or you could just go to the JOC website and you'll find the link to the events. And there you can find information on, again, September 29th to October 1st, Chicago Western River North Hotel, sign up to attend the event. And in regards to sort of tying it all together, a large portion of that conversation on rates and on service comes from what we've talked about here on this podcast. And so by coming to the event, we go even more in depth. Like there'll be a session where I will describe everything that we found in the scorecard, everything we found in the Intermodal Savings Index. We'll spend 30 minutes talking about what's going on in the scorecard, some of the findings in the scorecard, some of the things that we can build out of the scorecard in terms of best practices. We'll spend another 30 minutes going through what the Intermodal Savings Index is telling us on top of my presentation and what does it mean for the RFPs. And so it just connects all of these data points together in a conversation that hopefully prepares everyone for the next year, 2026, and does it in a place right around October 1st that hopefully is a good springboard for what we'll see next year. And fingers crossed, will be a good year for everyone.
Got my fingers and toes crossed.
Yeah. So events.joc.com and just joc.com for all the other stuff we were talking about.
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. Certainly LinkedIn. You send me a message on LinkedIn, I'll very quickly respond. As my wife sometimes says to me, maybe I check it too much in times that are not particularly productive to what's supposed to be the workday. But that said, I am very good at responding to messages on LinkedIn, and did, in fact, as we wrote the JB Hunt story the night before, talked to someone at like 7:00 at night, which probably didn't make my wife happy, but do speak to people on social media all the time. And certainly you reach out to me, I'll definitely respond quickly.
Great.
Excellent.
All right.
Excellent.
Thank you as always. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's always great to talk to Ari because he combines the, has the finger on the pulse of all the folks that he talks to with the numbers and just, a perspective that he's built over the years of doing this. So just great to hear his thoughts on some of the big news of the day and how things have developed in the industry.
Absolutely. He definitely has his finger on the pulse. He is talking to all different people within the industry, whether it's on the shipper side, the IMC side, railroad side. He's not shy to ask any questions. And yes, he does reach out at all times. And he's very responsive on answers. And I've always found the JOC to be very right down the center, or pretty close, as much as you can be down the center on reporting. It's definitely investigative reporting that they're doing. Again, always enjoy what Ari brings to the table for us. And the Inland Conference is a great conference. Particularly, he's talking about people that are always in the intermodal industry and always negotiating for the next year, but it's great for people. It's a great central location. It's in Chicago. It's a great place for people that are doing just truckload and want to know more about intermodal. Mm-hmm. There's just a ton to know, and ton to learn, and a ton of connections to make in a very short period of time. So it's a great conference to attend.
Yeah, so the link's in the description for all of what Ari's writing about, the Intermodal Savings Index, the Intermodal Service Scorecard, and Inland. All of that you can find there. And we appreciate having him on once again. We appreciate you watching and listening to the podcast. You can rate and review us wherever you get this podcast. Drop a comment. And also email us at podcast@intechlogistics.com if you have a longer comment that maybe you want to just send over to us privately. You can also learn more about Intech Logistics at www.intechlogistics.com. And we'll be back another time very soon with another episode. For Rick Lagore, I'm Kevin Baxter.